I want you to just close your eyes for a second. I mean, assuming you aren't driving,
Oh,
obviously.
right. Yeah, please keep your eyes on the road if you're in a car.
Yeah, safety first. But if you can, I want you to imagine a crime scene. But I want you to completely strip away all the usual elements that you're used to seeing in a procedural drama.
So, like, no ordinary criminals.
Exactly. Take away the standard financial motives, the crimes of passion, the mundane murder weapons, all of it. Instead, I want you to picture the yellow police tapes surrounding something just entirely different. Picture a scene where the culprits are literal monsters.
They're just such a wild visual.
Right, where the physical evidence isn't, it's not a fingerprint, it's like a smear of ectoplasm, or maybe a circle of arcane symbols burned into the floorboards. And the threat isn't a guy with a gun, it's malevolent spirits and ancient occult forces.
So the question becomes, who on earth do you call to investigate that?
Exactly, because you don't call a regular homicide detective, and you certainly don't call, like, an ordinary hospital doctor.
They wouldn't even know where to begin.
Right, they'd be useless. You need someone who bridges this gap between the rigid, uncompromising logic of a forensic investigation and the terrifying, completely unpredictable unknown of the supernatural. So, welcome to the deep dive.
We are so excited to get into this one.
We really are. Today, our mission is to explore this fascinating, curated stack of notes on a totally forgotten titan of pulp fiction. We are going to look at a character who was investigating the paranormal decades before it became the pop culture staple we know today.
Long before the modern stuff we all watch now.
Yeah, way before. And the goal is simple. We want to make you an instant expert on Jules de Grandin without you having to track down and, read nearly 100 vintage stories.
And it is a genuinely remarkable piece of literary history that we have the opportunity to dissect today, because we are looking at a character created by the author Seabury Quinn.
Seabury Quinn?
Yeah. And this character, Jules de Grandin, he made his debut in a publication called Weird Tales all the way back in 1925.
In 1925, that's 100 years ago.
It really is.
Yeah.
And what we're examining in these notes is essentially the foundational blueprint for a very specific type of narrative engine. It's one that takes the highly structured, logic-driven framework of a classic detective story, and it forcefully collides it with the chaotic, horrifying elements of the occult. It's this synthesis of two genres, the rational mystery and the irrational horror, that honestly, on paper, they should completely reject one another.
They really should. And for you listening right now, whether you're a diehard fan of classic mysteries who loves a tightly wound locked room puzzle, or maybe you're a horror aficionado who lives for the visceral scare.
Or honestly, even if you just love discovering those hidden gems of history that time almost forgot.
Yeah, exactly. This character is going to fascinate you because he perfectly bridges that gap. He basically takes the magnifying glass and points it directly at the monster.
He really does.
But the first thing that jumps out from our sources is just the sheer volume of material we're talking about here. I mean, the notes indicate that Seabury Quinn wrote 92 short stories and one full-length novel featuring Jules de Grandin.
Which is just staggering when you think about it.
It's massive. And this made him Quinn's most famous creation and, crucially, a major pillar of Weird Tales' identity during that entire era. 92 short stories and a novel starting in 1925. I mean, how does a single character carry that much weight without the audience getting completely exhausted?
Well, sustaining a single character across 93 distinct narratives, it requires a profound level of adaptability. And that has to come from both the author and from the character's foundational design.
Right.
I mean, think about the era we're discussing here. The year is 1925. The pulp magazine industry is thriving.
It's everywhere.
It's everywhere. And it's driven by this insatiable, almost frantic demand for cheap, thrilling content. So to keep a single character alive and relevant across that many stories is just an incredible feat of narrative endurance.
It really is.
What stands out in the source material is the sheer work ethic and the boundless imagination that was demanded of Seabury Quinn. Month after month, year after year, he had to conceptualize, structure, and execute completely fresh occult threats.
Right, because if you're writing that much, the temptation to just repeat yourself has to be completely overwhelming.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, you can't just have de Grandin fight the same vampire or the same restless ghost 90 times.
No, the readers would be bored out of their minds.
Exactly. The audience would drop the magazine by issue 4.
And that's exactly the problem Quinn faced. He had to build this rogues gallery of the supernatural that was constantly evolving. It had to escalate to keep the readers of Weird Tales coming back.
He had to keep upping the stakes.
Yeah, Jules de Grandin wasn't just a recurring character within the magazine. He essentially became the lifeblood of the publication during Quinn's run.
He was the anchor.
He provided a critical anchor of continuity in a magazine that was otherwise dedicated to wild, unpredictable anthology-style weird fiction.
And that continuity is such an interesting hook to me because it reminds me of, well, like a massively successful modern Monster of the Week television procedural.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
You know what I mean? Like you tune in every week and you know exactly who the heroes are, you know their specific banter, you know their investigative methods, but the threat, the monster they face is completely new.
Right. The formula is comfortable, but the danger is fresh.
Exactly. But I have to wonder about the mechanics of that appeal. Because when a character has 92 distinct short stories, does the appeal become more about the comfort of the familiar detective or the shock of the new monster each week? Like, what makes a character strong enough to literally become the identity of an entire magazine?
Well, that tension right there between the familiar and the novel is the primary engine that drives all long-running serialized fiction. If we look at how audiences consume these types of stories, we see this dual appetite at play.
Okay, dual appetite.
Yeah, so on one hand, the audience absolutely craves novelty. They want the thrill of the unknown, the shock of a monster they have never encountered before.
They want the surprise.
Right, a supernatural threat that breaks the established rules in a completely new and terrifying way.
They want to be scared by something they couldn't have possibly predicted.
Yes, but on the other hand, absolute, unrelenting novelty can actually be exhausting for a reader.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, if every single element of a story, the setting, the protagonist, the rules of the universe, the antagonist, if all of that is completely unfamiliar every single month, the reader has nothing to hold on to.
They're just unmoored.
Exactly. They have no emotional grounding. And this is where the detective archetype comes in. Jules de Grandin provides the psychological comfort of extreme competence.
Love that phrase, the comfort of extreme competence.
Because the readers of Weird Tales, they could open a new issue, encounter an unimaginably horrific occult threat that defied all explanation, but they'd still feel a sense of safety.
Because they knew their guy was on the case?
Exactly. In the knowledge that their familiar, highly capable investigator was there to handle it. The character becomes the identity of the magazine because he acts as the reader's trusted avatar in a world of absolute madness.
He's our guide.
The appeal isn't just the monster, and it isn't just the detective. It's the friction between the two. It's the spectacle of watching a known quantity grapple with an unknown variable.
He's the anchor in a sea of pulp chaos. I totally get that. But to understand how this specific character carried 93 separate narratives, we really have to put his incredibly unusual resume under the microscope.
We really do. It's quite the resume.
Because Jules de Grandin isn't just some random guy who, decided to start hunting ghosts one day in his basement. Our sources tell us he is a French physician and a former member of the French Sûreté who somehow transitioned into investigating supernatural cases.
And that very specific, highly structured background is arguably the most brilliant structural decision Seabury Quinn made for the long-term viability of the character.
Really? The background is that important?
Oh, absolutely. Let's dissect the duality of that resume because it's doing a lot of heavy lifting here. First, he's a physician. In the context of the early 20th century, a medical doctor represents the absolute pinnacle of empirical scientific thought.
Right, they're the ultimate men of science.
A physician's entire worldview is predicated on biology, anatomy, observable symptoms, and undeniable physical facts. They diagnose a problem based strictly on what they can see, touch, measure, and test.
Okay, let me stop you there, because the second half of that resume is just as rigid. He's a former member of the French Sûreté. Now, for anyone listening who might not be familiar with early 20th century French law enforcement, what exactly does that imply?
So the Sûreté is the elite National Investigative Police Force of France. It's essentially their equivalent to the FBI or Scotland Yard.
Okay, so the best of the best.
Right, focusing on complex national-level crimes. So putting that on his resume, it implies a background steeped in rigid investigative methodology. It means he is extensively trained in the establishment of motives, the rigorous tracking of physical evidence.
Right, chain of custody, all that.
Navigating bureaucracy, and the logical, step-by-step deduction of human criminality. So you have a man whose entire adult life, both medically and professionally, has been completely dedicated to the rational, the observable, and the strictly logical.
Everything has to make sense.
Exactly. And this is the man that Quinn thrusts into a world of ghosts, monsters, and magic.
But wait, I have to push back on this because it sounds like a fundamental contradiction. Bringing a medical doctor to fight a spirit feels like bringing a stethoscope to an exorcism.
A stethoscope to an exorcism, yes.
I mean, if the threats are occult and magical by nature, doesn't his heavily rational scientific background clash completely with the irrationality of monsters?
That's the first thing you would think,
Because,
sure.
I mean, how do you take a pulse on a poltergeist? How do you slap handcuffs on a demon? A doctor cures an infection with medicine, but you can't prescribe antibiotics to a werewolf. Doesn't his scientific arrogance actually set him up to fail?
That is a phenomenal question. And honestly, that inherent contradiction is exactly what makes the stories function on a much higher level than standard pulp horror.
Oh, really?
Yes. You're right, bringing a stethoscope to an exorcism sounds patently absurd. But consider this. What if the investigator treats the exorcism with the exact same clinical precision, the exact same lack of emotion as a complex surgical procedure?
Oh, wow. Okay, I see where you're going with this.
That friction you mentioned is the genius of the character design. De Grandin doesn't abandon his medical or law enforcement training when he encounters the supernatural. He actually applies it even more rigorously.
He leans into it.
He approaches the occult not with mystical awe, and certainly not with magical counterspells, but with forensic clinical detachment.
So he isn't lighting candles and chanting. He's looking for cause and effect.
Yes, he looks at a supernatural event as a set of symptoms to be diagnosed, or a trail of forensic evidence to be cataloged.
Right, like a crime scene.
Exactly. To give a hypothetical example based on his methods, if a traditional detective walks into a room, sees muddy footprints, and deduces the killer wore heavy boots.
Standard detective stuff.
Standard stuff. But de Grandin walks into a room, sees a specific type of ectoplasmic residue, cross-references it with his medical knowledge of cellular decay, and deduces they are dealing with a Class 4 manifestation that can only survive in damp environments.
Oh, that's brilliant.
He applies the scientific method to the unscientific.
I see. So he is essentially treating the paranormal as just another branch of science that the rest of the world simply hasn't documented yet. Or he's treating it like a crime where the perpetrator just happens to be dead or non-human.
Exactly. To a mind trained in both advanced medicine and elite law enforcement, the supernatural isn't a terrifying mystery to hide from. It's an offense against the natural order of the universe.
It's a puzzle to be solved.
It is a biological infection to be cured, or a criminal act to be solved and punished. By having a character who insists on aggressively applying human logic to illogical monsters, Quinn creates this fantastic narrative tension.
Yeah, you get the best of both worlds.
Right. The reader gets the visceral, heart-pounding horror of the monster. But they also get the intellectual satisfaction of watching a brilliant rationalist try to force that monster into a recognizable scientific box. It elevates the pulp material from mere sensationalism to a really complex procedural puzzle.
It totally flatters the reader. You know, you don't have to just sit there and be terrified by the blood and guts. You're going to play forensic detective alongside him.
Exactly.
But if we're talking about a sophisticated French Sûreté physician, we have to talk about his jurisdiction. Because, okay, so he brings clinical French logic to the paranormal. But wait, if he is the absolute epitome of European sophistication, why do our notes say he's operating out of Harrisonville, New Jersey?
Quite the commute.
Did he take a wrong turn at the Atlantic Ocean? I mean, New Jersey.
I know, the geographical and character juxtaposition here is masterfully executed by Quinn, and it is a very deliberate choice.
Deliberate.
Oh yeah, let's analyze the setting first, because it defies all the standard conventions of the genre. The classic archetype of the occult or the Gothic, it typically belongs in the fog-drenched cobblestone streets of Victorian London.
Right, Jack the Ripper territory.
Exactly. Or the ancient skull-lined catacombs of Paris, or a crumbling, isolated castle in Eastern Europe. Those settings inherently carry an atmosphere of the macabre.
You expect bad things to happen there.
Right. You expect to see a ghost in a crumbling castle. But Seabury Quinn deliberately chooses to base his elite, sophisticated French investigator in Harrisonville, New Jersey.
Which is just a regular town.
It is a seemingly mundane, highly relatable, quintessential American suburban setting.
It's brilliant, but it's completely absurd. It's like dropping James Bond into a suburban PTA meeting where half the parents happen to be vampires.
That is exactly what it's like.
You've got 1920s American streetcars, local neighborhood diners, quiet post-war suburban domestic life, and then suddenly a werewolf is tearing through the local pharmacy.
And that jarring contrast is the very mechanism that makes the horror so effective.
How so?
Well, grounding occult and supernatural threats in a deeply ordinary contemporary American setting serves to aggressively heighten the terror. Think about the psychology of the reader.
Okay.
When a monster is safely locked away in a faraway Transylvanian castle, it's a distant terror. The reader can close the magazine, look around their living room, and feel perfectly secure.
Because Dracula isn't coming to Ohio.
Exactly. But when the monster is lurking in the fictional town of Harrisonville, New Jersey, a place that feels like it could be the reader's own neighborhood, just down the street, the horror becomes immediate and palpable.
It hits too close to home.
It invades the domestic sphere. The mundane setting provides a baseline of absolute normalcy that makes the violent intrusion of the supernatural feel entirely more shocking.
Because it violates the safety of the known world. That makes perfect sense. But he isn't navigating this American landscape alone. The notes highly emphasize his partner, Dr. Samuel Trowbridge.
Yes, Trowbridge is essential.
But here's my question about Trowbridge. De Grandin is already a physician. He has the medical angle completely covered. Why give him a partner who is also a doctor?
It's an interesting choice, right?
Yeah. Usually you pair the brilliant eccentric with a tough guy or a regular blue-collar worker. Here you have two doctors. Does having a second doctor just serve to double down on the scientific angle, or is he there just to marvel at de Grandin's genius?
It is a vital dynamic,
Yeah.
and it serves multiple purposes. Yes, having another medical man certainly reinforces the scientific rational framing we discussed earlier.
Right, two scientists against the dark.
When both investigators can speak the high-level language of anatomy and biology, it grounds the supernatural investigation in an even thicker layer of clinical reality. However, Trowbridge's primary function is not medical.
What is it then?
It's psychological, both for de Grandin and, crucially, for the reader.
Okay, you're going to have to unpack that. How so?
Trowbridge acts as the indispensable sounding board. De Grandin is the eccentric, brilliant, often arrogant outsider who moves at 100 miles an hour.
He's probably exhausting to be around.
Totally exhausting.
Yeah.
Trowbridge, on the other hand, is the local, grounded, highly relatable American. Even though Trowbridge is a doctor, in the context of the stories, he represents the perspective of the everyday person confronting the impossible.
Oh, I see.
When de Grandin examines a bizarre corpse and immediately leaps to a brilliant, seemingly impossible conclusion about an obscure occult threat, Trowbridge is there to express the profound skepticism and the shock that the reader is feeling.
I see. Trowbridge isn't just a sidekick. He's the reader's panic button.
That's a great way to put it, the panic button.
Because he exists so the reader doesn't have to feel stupid when de Grandin makes an impossible leap in logic. He takes de Grandin's wild, deductive leaps about occult phenomena and translates them into understandable human reactions. Like, my God, de Grandin, you don't mean to say the local mayor is a ghoul? That kind of thing.
That is a perfect way to phrase it. He bridges the gap between the staggering, often alienating genius of the French detective and the ordinary audience reading the magazine.
Which is so necessary in Pulp Fiction.
It really is. And this specific dynamic, the brilliant, often eccentric and slightly condescending investigator, paired with his loyal, steadfast, and frequently baffled medical companion, leads us directly to the most frequent and famous literary comparisons made about Jules de Grandin in our source notes.
Right, the notes lean heavily into this. De Grandin is universally described as a pulp-era occult detective, and he's specifically compared in style and structure to Sherlock Holmes or Hercule Poirot.
Two absolute titans of the genre.
Right, but the massive neon sign that separates them is the rogues gallery. Holmes and Poirot are hunting down greedy heirs, jealous lovers, and calculating thieves who want inheritance money.
Mundane criminals.
De Grandin is hunting monsters, spirits, and occult threats that want to consume human souls. It's a completely different weight class.
These are two massive foundational literary archetypes to invoke, and analyzing why they apply to de Grandin reveals a great deal about how these specific stories function structurally. Let's take the Sherlock Holmes comparison first.
Okay, let's look at Holmes.
When you invoke Holmes, you are bringing in the archetype of the unparalleled, almost superhuman genius who relies entirely on deductive reasoning, paired with a loyal, grounded medical sidekick.
Right, Holmes and Watson.
The de Grandin and Trowbridge dynamic is a direct, undeniable parallel to Holmes and Watson. It is a formula that works beautifully because it allows the genius to be aloof, strange, and brilliant, while the sidekick keeps the narrative grounded and emotionally accessible to the reader.
Okay, I buy the Holmes and Watson parallel. That makes perfect sense. But what about the Hercule-Poirot comparison? How does that fit in?
That comparison hinges on the specific nature and personality of the protagonist himself. Hercule Poirot, Agatha Christie's famous creation, is the brilliant francophone outsider.
Oh, right, because Poirot is Belgian.
Exactly. He is fastidious, highly opinionated, extremely confident in his own methods, sometimes to the point of arrogance, and he almost always sees the crucial details that the bumbling local authorities completely miss.
That sounds exactly like de Grandin.
De Grandin fits this mold flawlessly. He brings a European sophistication, a distinct arrogance, and a completely different way of thinking to the mundane American setting of New Jersey.
Right.
He is the outsider whose unique cultural and intellectual perspective allows him to solve the bizarre cases the local police cannot even begin to comprehend. But as you noted, the fundamental shift is the nature of the crime itself.
Because it's not just a poison cup of tea.
Adapting these tightly wound, logic-based detective tropes to the wild, unrestrained, often chaotic world of pulp-era monsters creates an entirely unique subgenre.
But I have to challenge the actual mechanics of this comparison because I still see a contradiction here.
Let's hear it.
If he is truly like Holmes and Poirot, does that mean he solves occult cases using pure logic?
Yes.
But think about it. If I'm Sherlock Holmes, I can deduce the trajectory of a bullet by looking at a hole in the wall. I can deduce a suspect's timeline by checking the local train schedules.
Right. Physical, real-world clues.
Exactly. But how do you deduce the behavior of a restless spirit? Magic, by definition, breaks the rules of physics and logic. You can't just find a magical fingerprint and run it through a database. Does the pulp era setting force a fundamental change in how detective work is actually executed on the page?
This is where the concept of logic has to be stretched and redefined within the occult detective subgenre. You are absolutely correct that standard real-world deduction fails when applied to the supernatural.
You can't put a ghost on the stand.
You cannot use a train schedule to track a demon, and you cannot use ballistics to analyze a curse. However, what de Grandin does, and what makes the stories function successfully as detective fiction rather than just chaotic horror, is that he deduces the rules of the supernatural threat.
Wait, monsters have rules.
Yes. Even in folklore, myth, and pulp fiction, monsters are bound by internal logic.
Really? Like what?
Well, vampires have specific, documented aversions, like garlic or sunlight. Ghosts are often tied to specific physical locations or historical traumas.
Oh, like unfinished business.
Exactly. Magical spells require highly specific components or incantations to function. What de Grandin does is use his encyclopedic, almost obsessive knowledge of the global occult, combined with his medical and investigative training, to identify the specific nature of the threat.
Ah. So the logic isn't about physics, it's about the internal logic of the monster's lore.
Precisely that. He examines the scene of the supernatural crime, he meticulously analyzes the physical symptoms of the occult manifestation, and he deduces exactly what kind of entity they're dealing with.
He categorizes them.
Right. Once he understands the classification of the entity, he understands its rules, its biological or spiritual weaknesses, and its underlying motives. The detective work shifts from finding mundane physical evidence to identifying mythological and folkloric patterns.
That is so cool.
And because this is the pulp era, the pacing and the resolution are vastly different from a classic Golden Age mystery.
Right, because Agatha Christie novels usually end with a slow, polite parlor room reveal where everyone sits in comfortable armchairs while the detective talks for 20 uninterrupted minutes.
A very civilized wrap-up.
Yeah, and I can't imagine you can ask a werewolf to sit quietly in the parlor while you explain how you caught him.
You certainly cannot. Pulp fiction demands constant action, high stakes, and visceral thrills. De Grandin might use Poirot's sharp observation and Holmes's quiet deduction to figure out what the monster is and what its weaknesses are.
But then what?
Well, once he has that knowledge, the climax of the story usually involves a highly kinetic, intensely dangerous physical confrontation. It is an intellectual puzzle that almost always culminates in a desperate battle for survival, often involving firearms, chemical concoctions, or ancient relics.
It's brain power followed immediately by firepower.
Beautifully said, yes.
So taking all of this into account, the brilliant detective, the horrific monster, the loyal sidekick, the fish-out-of-water setting, the intense action, we start to see why Jules de Grandin hasn't just been lost and buried in the dusty, forgotten archives of the 1920s alongside thousands of other pulp characters.
He had staying power.
He survived. Which brings us to how you, listening right now, can actually experience these stories today. Our notes point out that modern audiences can access the character through collected editions and audiobooks, specifically mentioning titles like The Best of Jules de Grandin and The Complete Tales of Jules de Grandin.
And the fact that these stories are not only accessible but actively curated in these modern, high-quality formats is incredibly significant from a historical perspective.
It shows people still care.
It does. The survival of a pulp character, created in 1925 into modern collected editions and audio formats, speaks volumes about the enduring foundational appeal of the occult detective archetype.
Right.
We have to remember that pulp magazines were, by their very nature, ephemeral. They were printed on the cheapest possible paper, explicitly meant to be read on a train commute, and then discarded.
They were basically disposable entertainment.
Completely. For a character to transcend that highly disposable format and be curated into definitive collections nearly a century later proves that Seabury Quinn struck a narrative nerve that still resonates deeply with modern audiences.
It is amazing when you think about the physical reality of it. The cheap paper they were printed on literally turned to dust decades ago, but the character and the archetype lived on.
And the specific mention of audiobooks in our notes as a primary way to access these stories today is especially fitting.
Why is that?
It harkens back to something very primal in human storytelling. Long before we had printed magazines, novels, or television, horror and mystery were primarily oral traditions.
Right, sitting around the campfire.
Exactly. Ghost stories were meant to be spoken aloud, shared by the fire in the dark. The serialized, episodic nature of the original pulp magazines like Weird Tales, where you received a new self-contained adventure every single month, that translates perfectly to the modern audiobook format.
Because it's episodic.
Listening to a narrator vividly recount the bizarre adventures of de Grandin and Trowbridge replicates that ancient feeling of gathering around to hear a thrilling, chilling tale of the unknown.
I love that connection to the oral tradition of storytelling. It makes the act of listening feel like participating in history.
It really does.
So for someone listening right now who's intrigued and wants to jump in, you have a really big choice to make based on those titles in our notes. Do you grab The Best of Jules de Grandin and treat it like a curated tasting menu?
Like a highlight reel.
Yeah. You know, let the editors serve you up his absolute greatest monster hunts, the most perfectly crafted puzzles, without any filler. Or do you take a deep breath and commit to The Complete Tales?
Which is a huge undertaking.
I mean, think about the sheer scale of that. 92 stories and a novel. If you go for The Complete Tales on audiobook, that is a monumental binge listen. You aren't just reading a few spooky stories, you are basically moving into Harrisonville, New Jersey, and watching this character and this author evolve over an entire era of publishing history.
It is a fascinating choice for a modern reader. It's essentially a choice between curated highlights and the full, immersive, sometimes messy historical experience.
Right, the good and the bad.
The Best of offers the tightest, most refined examples of the occult detective formula. It showcases Seabury Quinn at the absolute height of his narrative powers, delivering the best mysteries and the scariest monsters.
But The Complete Tales.
But The Complete Tales offers something completely different, something for the true literary historian or completionist. It's the chance to witness the trial and error of a working writer.
Oh, you get to see him figure it out in real time.
Yes, you see the evolution of the tropes in real time, the subtle shifts in character dynamics, and you bear witness to the staggering stamina required to keep a character alive, fresh, and fighting across 93 separate supernatural crises. Whichever path one chooses, they are stepping into the foundational text of a genre that completely dominates modern entertainment today.
It is incredible. We are looking at the foundational DNA of every modern supernatural investigator you see on TV or in movies today, sitting right there in 1925, fully formed.
It's all there.
So to wrap this all up and bring it home for you, Jules de Grandin is the 1925 pulp era phenomenon that you need to know about. Seabury Quinn took the brilliant deductive model of Sherlock Holmes and Hercule Poirot. He injected it with the rigid, uncompromising logic of the French Sûreté and empirical medical science.
And then he dropped that sophisticated, arrogant package right into the mundane heart of Harrisonville, New Jersey.
Right alongside the steadfast, panicking Dr. Trowbridge. And then he spent 92 stories and a full novel, throwing every occult threat imaginable at them. In doing so, he became the absolute face of Weird Tales.
And as we conclude our analysis of these notes, I want to leave you with a final thought, extrapolating solely from the enduring nature of this character and the specific fears he was designed to combat.
What's that?
Well, if this character from 1925 required the combined formidable skills of a medical physician and a top-tier national police investigator just to survive his fictional adventures, what does our modern continued appetite for his collected editions and audiobooks say about us today?
Oh, that's a deep question.
Perhaps it reveals our own enduring, deep-seated hope. It suggests that no matter how terrifying, monstrous, or seemingly inexplicable the unknown might be, we desperately want to believe that human logic, scientific methodology, and unwavering deduction can still ultimately solve the case.
We want to believe that if we are smart enough and brave enough, we can outsmart the monsters in the dark. I love that. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of Jules de Grandin. Keep asking questions, keep looking for the logic hidden inside the madness, and keep seeking out the weird and wonderful corners of history. Until next time.